Okay, so hello, Hilmi. So I would like to do my presentation for research methodology. So this is the title of my research, which is the application of inter-Korean sport diplomacy to strengthen bilateral relation in Korean Peninsula post-Korean War. The study case of Indonesia in 2019 Asian Games. So I'll begin with the background presentation and my research question. My research question is to what extent the application of inter-Korean sport diplomacy can strengthen bilateral relation in Korean Peninsula. The background why I take this research is the North Korea and South Korea used to be a single nation until 1945 when the World War II ended. The two nations have been divided and engaged in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, as the organizer of Olympic Games, support a negotiation of creating unified team between North Korea and South Korea on Olympic Tokyo 1964. And for the hypothesis of this research is if inter-Korean sport diplomacy applied, it can strengthen bilateral relations in Korean Peninsula and stimulate the unification. The instant is the ROK and the PRK were having a bad diplomatic relation post-Korean War 1950 to 1953, and the war only ended with armistice agreement and there was no peace treaty between them until today. So the importance of this issue is the interkorean sport diplomacy has the possibility to strengthen the ROK and the PRK bilateral relation post the Korean War. And the diplomacy of both countries still exists and has the possibility to stimulate the unification through the sport diplomacy. And the IV for this reason is inter-Korean sport diplomacy and the DV is bilateral relation in Korean Peninsula. The next part is the review of related literature on IV. The IV is Inter-Korean Sport Diplomacy, and based on Craig Esrick from the journal titled Sport Diplomacy, a review of how sport can be used to improve international relations. Sport diplomacy is an instrument of soft power who can provide a contribution in achieving the national interest of country. And the sport diplomacy has various forms such as soccer diplomacy, table tennis diplomacy, and etc. And the second one is inter-Korean sport diplomacy. Inter-Korean sport diplomacy, that is one of the situation where the North and South Korea has built a cooperation in the field of sport. The sport diplomacy, or else could be said as the sport cooperation between the North and South Korea, and it is actually a reflection of their political relation through the sport. Next one is the review of related literature on BV, bilateral relations. The bilateral relation of the PRK and ROK after the Korean War in 1950 until 1953 meant the competition for legitimacy between Seoul and Pyongyang remained fierce for decades after the Korean War. They have fought with each other for domestic legitimacy and international recognition. However, from the early 1970s onward, inter-Korean relations have moved fitfully and gradually toward greater contact and mutual recognition, a process which has accelerated since the end of 1990s, based on the Charles K. Armstrong on the inter-Korean relation in a historical perspective. And the bilateral relation of the PRK and ROK on Indonesian 2018 Asian Games, which is the two Koreas to march together under a unified peninsula flag and form combined teams to compete in the Indonesia 2018 Asian Games. They agreed to create combined teams for the upcoming games and for the other international competition, especially the sport competition. The agreement comes amid range of talks as a part of efforts to promote the reconciliation, including the opening military hotlines and arranging reunions for families of Koreans divided by the 1950 to 1953 Korean War. And the bilateral relations start here with how they want to compete under the unified peninsula flag in the Indonesian Asian Games. The next part is the review of related literature on both IV and DV. The first one is inter-Korea sport diplomacy. If sport diplomacy is implemented as a part of state foreign policy, then it can be highly effective. Inter-Korean dialogue is the best example of sport being effectively used to achieve foreign policy goals. Sport diplomacy is the optimum method for North and South Korea to facilitate dialogue. In December 1999, where the North Korea sent their national basketball team to play in South Korea, and it was well accepted by the public, and it is show how the sport can really make the bilateral relationship between ROK and PRK is getting better by their sport diplomacy. And the next one is the DPRK and ROK in Asian Games 2018 in Indonesia. 2018 Asian Games Indonesia was a harmony. Since the 2018 Winter Olympics, the Inter-Korean Summits and Joint Sports Team have demonstrated that two Koreas have attempted to convey peace and harmony. Indeed, the South Korea Prime Minister Lee Nak-yong and officials from North Korea observed the opening parade of the nation, in which some of the athletes of unified Korea held hands. Thus, the themes of unity and peace were prevalent in the 2018 Asian Games, which they agree and competing and achieving some of the model in the Indonesian Asian Games under the unified peninsula flag. Moving on to the theoretical framework. The first one is the conceptual diagram. Based on the research question, which is to what extent the application of inter-Korean sport diplomacy can strengthen bilateral relations in Korean Peninsula. The IV sport diplomacy and the DV inter-Korean relation, which is in the process to change the DV from the IV, it is affected the relationship between the bilateral relation of ROK and DPRK, and also the inter-Korean sport diplomacy done by both countries. The next part is the conceptual definition of the sport diplomacy. Sport diplomacy as an instrument of soft power can provide a contribution in achieving the national interest of country. Moreover, it also can become a tool in public diplomacy to make it more effective. Sport diplomacy has various forms such as ping pong diplomacy, and also sport provides an unofficial reason and location for international leaders to meet and begin a dialogue. The potential diplomatic contribution of international sport events can be various. They can serve as a general outreach to the international community or strengthen the relation between two specific countries. And here the case between DPRK and ROK in case of sport diplomacy, how they execute the sport as a tool of diplomacy for both countries. The operational definition of inter-Korean relation. The devastating Korean War between 1950 and 1953 made the competition for legitimacy between Seoul and Pyongyang remain fierce for decades after the Korean War. They have fought with each other for domestic legitimacy and international recognition. In inter-Korean relations, North and South Korea can use the sport diplomacy as one of their ways to pursue diplomatic dialogue. This relation encompasses the sport exchanges on the various levels, from the early sport event as well. Lately, they use the sport event as one of the circumstances in order to arrange the political talks between two countries, which this really can affect how the DPR can also has the bilateral relation and build up the dialogue of both countries in Korean Peninsula through the sport event or sport competition. The relation between the IV and DV, which is the bilateral relation between ROK and DPRK. The bilateral relation between ROK and DPRK began when President Kim Dae-jung became the first South Korean president to visit North Korea in 2000. 55 years since the peninsula was split, and it was a really long time ago when they have the conflict and have the war until the president of South Korea visit the North Korea. Under President Kim, South Korea implemented the Sunshine Policy in order to encourage more good relationship with North Korea. The relation continued with North Korea's appearance in the 2018 Winter Olympics. The relationship has seen a substantial diplomatic breakthrough and has become considerably warmer in 2018. The two countries also signed the Panmunjom Declaration for Peace, Prosperity, and Unification of the Korean Peninsula in April 2008. And the last part is the scope and limitation. Decisions will limit the case to the sport diplomacy as the main subject, and there will be an analysis on the key actors that will be limited to the government of DPRK and ROK in how they maintain the inter-Korean relation. In this research, they will also highlight on the single unified flag that being used at Indonesia 2018 ASEAN Games, which I have mentioned before. And on the last part, the research methodology. I wish the qualitative research in this research and based on Creswell, the definition of qualitative research is a research method to explore and understand the meaning that some individuals or groups of people think come from social or human problems. The reason why I use this qualitative research is to enhance the data research by collectively finding the related research about the strengthened bilateral relation with Korean Peninsula from both of the government official reports and also from the international organization official wording regarding the sport diplomacy in Indonesian Asian Games. Also, the reports or news that could be found to enhance this research, along with the journal studies about the Korean Peninsula and the Asian Games, and how sport has bring the improvement to both country bilateral relation and how they can fix up their relation post-Korean War in the 1950 to 1953 through the sport diplomacy in Korean Peninsula. Okay, I think that's all regarding my presentation. I hope I get a lot of feedbacks from Tehilmi and thank you.